blessing over Torah study. It ends with La'asok b'divrei Torah. You can say it with me if you want, but I'll say for everybody. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. All right, thank God. Okay, so our topic today, here we are going into in the beginning, at the beginning of everything, and there's just so much to talk about. But our topic today is one that was signaled kind of famously by maybe the great Parshan or Parshanit of our age, Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg. And this is maybe the greatest kind of work of Parshanut in our age, the big Genesis, the beginning of desire, it's called, Reflections on Genesis, the beginning of desire. And Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg is she has a PhD in literature and is drawing from like psychology, and this is just a remarkable book. But I want to just to borrow very directly from this idea that Genesis is the beginning of desire, and that desire is one of the primary themes right from the start. We go into this, the first story, we were told how the world is created, and then the first story is the Garden of Eden story. And one way to think about that story is that it's a story about figuring out what to do with desire. Okay, I don't want to say much more than that, because what I want to get into is we say pretty, Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg, who again you should read, is like marshaling the whole of, I think, like, Western literature and philosophy and Jewish textual tradition and Parshanut. It's a very wide-reaching lens. Our lens in this class tends to be a little narrower, and we're just going to look mostly at the text of the Torah. Every once in a while, bring in some of the commentators to illuminate the text. But I want us to look at the theme of desire in the words in the text of the Torah itself, not just as a kind of symbolic secondary reading, but really it's there, it's right there. Let's just talk for a second about what desire is, because I don't know exactly how to define it, but it's like wanting in one way. That's easy enough. I can say desire is a form of wanting, but why not just wanting? What is it about why do we have in English anyway, that word desire? What is extra about desire? What is significant? What kind of wanting is it to desire? Can we just sort of like speak that out? Because I'm going to toss the word desire around a lot over the next hour, and we're going to see it used in different ways, so we can shift our definition. But does anyone have a sense of what is it about desire that's different from simply wanting something? Let's start from the command seat on the Enterprise with Payam Emrani.
Desire connotes some kind of longing. In order for you to desire something, you sort of have to know what it already is, or you might form the mind's picture of what desire is. I think desire is balanced with curiosity, which are two different things.
Okay. So there's something, I think, curiosity is an interesting word, and I think that let's just keep that in our minds, because something about that suggests a desire to know more, and if so, Payam, I think, is on exactly the right track, or at least one of the right tracks. And Payam also suggests that there's a longing in there that is beyond wanting. In other words, the very word longing suggests like something unfulfilled. When I desire something, the state of desire, of course, wanting also is unfulfilled, but it doesn't seem as desperate or as urgent or as like potentially unfulfillable. Right? Okay, I see a lot of hands up, and I'm not going to take every definition of desire, but let's take a couple more. Noah.
Yeah, desire, I like to think of this as more sort of, what's the base need of my body right now? What's the base need of my soul right now? The base need of my soul is to want to be with God or to learn more Torah. But the body, I'd say the body needs like food, shelter, water, warmth, somewhat in that order, but how can we make our bodies needs the same as the souls? And for that, I don't know.
Okay, that's excellent, because I think that takes us to another important consideration, which is the extent to which desire refers to like urges, and perhaps physical urges, basic physical, maybe emotional urges, but something instinctual, something maybe that the body wants. And that's important to start talking about and thinking about, because we will speak of, and we tend to speak of desire in, first of all, it is often used in a sexual context or a love context, right? That word to say it in English is already to think about love and wanting and lusting and all. So desires, it signals that kind of wanting, but also in the story, the desire is going to be for a fruit. So it's also like, you know, it's also the desire, as Noah framed it nicely, the desires of the body, the things that the body wants and the urges of the body, the things that might even be natural urges that the body has. Okay, so we're thinking about those things as well. All right. By the way, I just want to encourage everybody to participate. And I'm going to, what I'll try to do is just anybody who speaks, who raises their hand, I'll try to get to. I'll call on people again if I don't see more people, but this is really an open space where we're interested in, our learning happens through the multiplicity of interpretations. We sort of navigate through them and try to sift through and figure out what we're left with. So really everybody is always welcome. And it is the diversity of voices, I think, that makes this space so exciting. So let's take another thought from Matt Webster.
Desire suggests the absence of something, like the D part. So that's my thought.
Okay, good. Okay, the desire, something is missing. So again, that state of longing is a state of being unfulfilled. I think we have time for one more. Kate?
Hi, yeah, I was going to say that in my mind, desire is more emotional and more passionate. And particularly as we think about the fruit, it is also not rational.
Okay, that's helpful as well. That's helpful. Something about desire does not sound like, it doesn't sound like, well, I looked through the possible options and considered what was most necessary, and I've rationally made the best choice among them. It doesn't sound like what it's about. It sounds like something that is distinctly, maybe not irrational, but distinctly irrational. There's something else that's pulling us, and I don't know. Do we have control over it? Do we have any? Is it more natural? Is it dangerous? All these questions begin to emerge. But I think Kate is right that it's not the working of the brain that we feel ourselves to be talking about when we talk about desire. Okay, it's good to just sort of, we're going to really be looking at that word and asking, in fact, whether that is the right word for this Hebrew corollary, which we see for the first time in this Parsha, in Parshat Bereshit. Now, one of the things that happens in Parshat Bereshit, in this very first opening, is that there's a lot of God says, and then there is, right? God said, let there be light, and then there was light. And actually, in that case, God said, let there be light, vayehi or. It's exactly the same. That's actually, it actually is very distinct, because it is as God said it should be. God said, yehi or, vayehi or, right? That's true for light, but for most of the rest of Parshat Bereshit, we're contending with, and the Torah, it seems to be clearly suggesting that God says one thing and then there is another thing, right? So some of them are nitpicky, like the commentators look through. Oh, it says a fruit. God said that the earth should make a fruit tree that produces fruit, and then instead there was a tree that produces fruit. It doesn't have the exact same language, and you'll see that every time that there's a deviation from the language that God intends, there's a flurry of commentary explaining why it's different or what's different about it. This is a kind of a pattern that Parshat Bereshit sets up. God says one thing, but how is it a little different when it actually comes into the world? And that in itself is kind of a meta theme. That the part of what we're negotiating here in Bereshit is the difference between God's vision for things, the ideal, the vision, machshava, the way that it was intended, and then our experience here in reality, how it plays out in our reality, the real, the human, the terrestrial, the practical, right? The what we did with what God said, because at first God is just speaking the world into being, but then God starts to say things to us. Okay, so with that in mind, I want to show you the first place that desire appears in the Torah, and this is as God intends desire to be. Okay, so let me give you a link today to our source sheet, and we're going to get into it now. The first chapter of Genesis, many of you know, is the 7 days of creation. And then in the second chapter of Genesis, there is either, some say, a new creation story, or some say a kind of like rewind and zooming into different pieces of the creation story. But the second chapter starts more in the storytelling voice than the first chapter, which is poetic. Okay, so let's take a look now at the appearance of desire. The eternal God, all right? There's our friend God. Vayita Hashem Elokim, the eternal God planted a garden in Eden. In the east, Mikedem. V'yasem sham et ha'adam asher yatzar, and placed there the human being whom God had formed. Okay, so we heard that God had formed a human being. This is where God places the human being down. And the eternal God sprouted up from the ground every tree that was desirable to the sight and good for eating. Here's the words in Hebrew. Nechmad lemareh, v'tov lema'achal. Okay, this is the phrase we're going to be paying attention to. And that first word, that's desire there. That, or at least, I mean, we can continue to play around with exactly what other words we might want to use. Most often translated as desire, and it continues to mean desire on through medieval poetry. You're not nafshi chamda, like my soul yearns, my soul desires. Chemed, chemda, like this language of wanting, of desire. I think it's a fine translation for now, and that's the root there that we're going to be paying attention to, is chemed or nechmad. In modern Hebrew, we now just say that nechmad is something nice. That's nice, nechmad. But in biblical Hebrew, it means much more like a desirable thing. Okay, so there it is. The eternal God sprouted up from the ground every tree that was desirable to the sight and good for eating. And then there they are. The one famous tree, and then we don't often pay attention. There's another tree that's a little less famous, but the tree of life in the middle of the garden, and then the famous or infamous tree, the tree of knowledge of good and bad. We're going to get to that tree soon. That's where the drama really begins. But in this context, I would like to, now we played around with the word desire a little bit before. What's desire here? What is the meaning of desire here? Because God makes these trees, I'm just going to put it on the screen once more as I say it. What is the meaning of desire when all the trees, all these trees are desirable to the sight, nechmad lemareh v'tov lemachal, and good to eat. Okay, so we kind of know what good to eat might mean. What does desirable to the sight mean? Oh, I'm calling my mother. Two things. I notice there's a tree of life, and then there's another tree of knowledge, right? Is that one tree or two separate trees? It's a good question. It's a good question, because it says that the tree of life is in the middle of the garden, And then it adds that there's another tree. And later, it's the second tree in the middle of the middle of the garden that will be the problem. And Eve will call it the tree in the middle of the garden. So this is important because there's some confusion around which tree is the bad tree. And at the end of this reading, God will get upset and say, now that they've eaten from the tree of knowledge, they can't eat from the tree of life. Now, that's a separate class. We would have to go in a different direction to really understand. I don't really understand that. But it's important here because part of what we'll need to think about in this story is, does desire create confusion? Does desire blur the vision? Okay, and that's important here because we're talking about something that is desirable to the eyes, okay, to the sight, and sight will be important here. Okay, so let's hold that for now. Thank you, Mom. Matt.
There we go. There we go. So there are several things here that strike. It amazes me how much strikes me as soon as we look. One is sight is superficial, and I think even in Torah there is that distinction that sight is surface, that desirable to the sight is, and it knows that because it says, and they're good to eat. So the fact that they're desirable doesn't make them good. It makes them attractive. It pulls me, but then this isn't where we're going this week, and I apologize, but I never noticed. It says they're good to eat, and then it says the next two trees. Well, if they're good to eat, doesn't that sort of throw? I know that's not where we're going.
Okay, no, but okay. So that's right. I mean, there's something about this desirability that is part of the problem. It's going, if these trees, we know this, like we don't have to, this is such a famous story that we can already suggest, you're not supposed to eat from the tree of good and evil. And yet it is desirable. It looks desirable. And Matt, what's that?
And it's good.
And it's good.
It's good to eat.
The other thing that Matt said, though, I think is especially important, which is that there seems to be some distinction between that which is good and that which is desirable. They might overlap, but here they're two different things. One is desirable to the eyes, and I love what Matt did and that's a surface understanding. You see what it looks like is desirable. The immediate, the thing I can see is desirable. What is actually good about it is that it has nutrients, or it will be tasty, or I will consume it, or I will have an interaction. It will sustain me. But that's what's good about it. And there's something different about the goodness of it than the desirability of it. Remember, of course, we have to say, they don't know the difference between good and bad. Right? That's the whole point. They don't know that distinction, but God seems to be signaling, and God has from the start said, this is good, this is good, this is good. So what's good about these trees? They're eating. Now, how they look beautiful, but that's a different thing. That's the desire. Okay. All right, let's take another couple of voices, and then we're going to jump to how this plays out and start to do some of this comparative work. Alexandra.
So I love this. I've never looked at it this way or had it presented in this way. To me, my understanding of desire is that it forms at the moment of our soul's individuation from God, our separation from God. And this idea that the soul, when we're separated from God into an individual form that becomes the body, develops all these erroneous ideas of what that means, that we feel rejected by God, and we have all these issues, core issues that come up from being separated from God to become a human. And one of the things that I love about this is that it says God has planted the trees that we need for this place. God has given us what we need, And what I love about your mother's comment is, but it's confusing. And that's the path of evolving as a soul, as a human, is this discernment. And how do we discern, like we have these desires because we have all these issues. And how do we discern what's good and what's not good? But God has given us everything we need. We just have to work on ourselves to discern.
Excellent. So so Alexander is presenting us with a really classic Jewish theology. And it's an important one to consider because God is a major character in this story. So is desire being set up by God, weirdly, as a kind of competitive force? And because there are things that are good for you. There are things that God wants for you. There is perhaps, as Alexander put it, God itself as a source of nourishment. But you could play that out in lots of ways. God's will as a source of nourishment. God's, plan for humanity as the right plan. But then there's these other things that you desire that are not God's will for you. That, you could make that concrete, like God said no, or you can make it abstract, like that isn't the truest, highest form of substance, but it's a distraction. And maybe the Genesis suggests God is, deliberately placing that distraction, or is responsive. What is the beginning of desire? God is the beginning of desire. God plants something desirable into creation and then says, don't do this. And so part of what desire becomes about is struggling against at least some desires. And the question becomes, well, how do you desire that which you ought to desire? Or how do you desire that which God wants you to desire? There are many ways to formulate that, but is desire essentially a temptation away from the thing which is truly for your good, for your tov? Okay, Florine.
I'm going crazy with this word, desire. In the etymology of that word in English, it comes from a statement that says from the stars or from the heavenly bodies. So if the basic etymology in English mean it's God-derived, we're going to assume that. My question is, what is the etymology of the word Nahmad in Hebrew?
Okay, all right. So that's a great question. I mean, part of the rules of the game here, part of the dilemma when we are trying to analyze words in the Torah is that the Torah at least presents herself as a kind of founding document, as if these are the first usages. You are to read this as if this is the first instance. But then again, what does that mean? Like, how do you identify words in a language if it's never been used before? And clearly it has. Clearly there's some kind of context for it. We will get to that, what exactly the context is. But for now, we're using this scene as one form of context. That the first thing that we know about desire, we're going to see it used in different ways that'll, I think, will help clarify what is that root. But for now, it has something to do with sight. That's the first thing we know about it, is that a thing that you see is a thing that can be desirable. It can be desirable to the eyes. And so we have to think, as we've been doing, about what exactly that means, that something would be desirable to the eyes. Okay, at the halfway point here, so, it's like you can spend the entire week just talking about the bet in Bereshit. Like we could, there's too much here, and once you get started, you can't stop. So let's try to push ourselves forward a little bit and look at, I think, one of the biggest twists in this journey happens just a chapter later. Okay, the placement of desire is there in chapter 2. Placement, literally planting of desire, is in chapter 2. And I think that kind of metaphorical language is intentional. God plants desire into the world. Then we get the famous chapter 3. Famous chapter 3 because enter the snake. Okay, enter the snake. And I always have to say, and I said this actually even on the podcast, the little 15-minute podcast, I always have to say that the last line in chapter 2 is actually like an essential piece of the story. The first line in chapter 1 is, now the snake was the shrewdest of all the wild beasts that the eternal God had made. But it's important that when the snake comes on the scene, the last thing that we read was that the two of them were naked, the human and his woman, but they felt no shame. Okay, that's important. Just that'll be important for the story, that they were sitting there naked and they didn't care. Okay, now the story begins. The snake was the shrewdest of all the wild beasts the eternal God had made. He said to the woman, the snake said to the woman, did God really say, you shall not eat of any tree of the garden? I just want to give us the classic context, just so we know how desire plays into this story, because it's far before it was just a word. Now it's a force. Now it's actually playing out in reality. The woman replied to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the other trees of the garden. It's only about fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden that God said, you shall not eat of it or touch of it, lest you die. And here my mother's comment becomes especially relevant, because there's Eve talking about the tree in the middle of the garden, but there were two trees in the middle of the garden. In fact, the tree of life was the one. So there's some confusion here. Okay, so that's correct. There's some confusion here. And the serpent said, I translated it to snake the first time, but I didn't change it throughout. So it's the same word throughout, nachash. And the serpent said to the woman, you're not going to die, but God knows that as soon as you eat of it, your eyes will be opened. Right? There's the eye language. Your eyes will be opened, and that you will be like divine beings, or you'll be like God itself, who know good and bad. Okay, now look at how this phrase, desirable to the sight and good for eating, is used, but reconfigured in this next verse. V'tereh ha'isha כי טוב העץ למאכל, וכי תאווהו לעיניים, ונחמד העץ להשכיל. So the woman saw that the tree was good for eating, and that it was a temptation to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable for understanding. ותיקח מפריו, ותאכל, ותיתן גם לאישה, אימה, ויאכל. She took of its fruit and she ate. She gave some to her man who was with her. I always think it's important to note this word in the Torah. He was right there with her. He was with her. Okay. The man was rested. The Torah makes clear, standing there with her, and he ate as well. Okay. Now let's just pay attention to what happened here. The tree was good for eating. Okay. The tree was good for eating. That we saw before. But things have changed. Something's changed. We have some new language, okay? So the tree was good for eating, but she saw also that it was, and this is a new word, a ta'ava, a taiva, a temptation for the eyes, and that it was desirable. Here's our word for desire, v'nechmad ha'etz lahaskil. Now, this is a hard word to translate it. I translated it as understanding. It means like reasoning, processing, understanding, grasping. Perceiving is probably the best translation, perceiving. It's a little bit hard to think of that root without after the Middle Ages, because it became so associated with reasoning, to reason through. But we've already had some cautionary, Kate gave us some cautionary about thinking about all of this as too much in the rational. So I'm not sure how to translate it, but you can see that there's a clear difference here. God said that the trees were tov lemachal, good to eat, v'nechmad lemareh, and they were desirous to the sight. What Eve sees is that the tree is good to eat. I don't know how she sees that, but she sees that it's tempting to the eyes, and that it's desirable for laskil, to perceive, to understand, to grasp it. Now, I don't know exactly what it means that the language has been so distinctly changed in these ways, but I'd love to hear some theories. What's the shift? the introduction of temptation, which is not the word that was originally used, and then this new thing, which is desire, not just for the eyes, but for the grasping, the perceiving. Okay. All right. Seeing some hands up. So I would like to turn to either Leah or Ari. Anyone feel like this is a good, either of you feel like it's a good moment to jump in, or you want to hold? Ari? No? Leah? No?
I'll hold.
You're a hold. Ari, come on in.
Your use of the word grasping really struck me because I think to relate to what we're going, but also, look, the fundamental thing about desire that I can think of in the Western tradition is that it sows discord. Okay, like I can think of tons of stories. Helena Troy, they desire, there's only one of her. It's not like water. You and I can share water. No. Only one of us gets Helena Troy. Game of Thrones has similar founding episode. And here in the middle of the Garden of Eden, God plants something that's not for you. Okay, it is limited. There's only one of them, or maybe two of them. It's kind of confusing. And they desire to grasp it. They desire to own it. It just sows this kind of disharmony and discord between them and the snake and all this kind of stuff. Why? Because it's fundamentally limited. And in this sense, it's fundamentally not theirs. It's not for you. It's for God.
What you're saying is so important that I feel compelled to interrupt. Perhaps you want to add more, but this is a critical point, because this is how it's going to play out in Jewish interpretation. But as we'll soon see in the Torah itself, a big part of what desire becomes about is desiring that which is not yours. Desiring something you are not supposed to have. Not just because God said so, because it doesn't belong to you. It's not yours. And I just want to note that, and Ari is pointing us in this way, that's not the language that was originally used. God, if I may, seemed to think that we could just desire something from afar, just see it and appreciate it. Okay, might be one way of splitting the difference is God says, just desire it with your eyes, it'll be nice. But the time it gets to human beings, it's lahaskil. Ari liked the grasp, and as he was talking, I was remembering that I don't know if that's unrelated. There's later in the book of Genesis, there's a use that Jacob was sikel et yadav, that like there's a kind of guile or craft or grasping to. In other words, that something about human desires. Well, once I desire it, I want it for me, whether it belongs to someone else or not. It's not just that I like it or that I want it, but I want it to be mine. Okay, and the grasping is part of that.
We say that with eyes too in English, right? You eye something. That's not just looking at something, right? It's an ownership through your eyes. I mean, probably feminist theory would have that as the male gaze. Right.
Yeah. To desire is almost to desire to possess. And by implication in this context, to desire to possess something which you are not entitled to possess, right? Like you don't desire your coffee table. It sits it's there. You have it now. You may desire to sit down and have, but that's different. Okay. All right. Trying to figure out whether to move forward here, but let's hang in a little bit because we have more work to do, because it isn't that straightforward. Things got very blurry because we substituted a lot of words, and then there's the word temptation. It's now tempting to the eyes, which is a different word. And remember, Ari and I are playing with the kind of like taking and grabbing, but there's also something about understanding and perceiving.
Yes.
Oh. Yes, Leah, please.
Oh, go to the grocery store and go to the fruits and vegetables. We are wired to what looks delicious. And they know that. And that's why when you get to the cookies, they design the packages to get our attention. But really, the colors of plants, the colors of fruits, I have a sense that before Adam and Eve took of what I will call the forbidden fruit, things ran at a generally serene pace. But then when we kick up, put it into fourth gear, where now there is desire, things get really, really interesting. God says after the creation of each day, it was good. Do we ever say that? We have then these people that are looking back on the fantastic career of their lives where they've created families and herds and movement, revolution, like Moses. Does he ever sit back and say, oh, this was good? Like last week before he died. We never, ever can do that. I think because we got vitamin desire in our bodies now through eating, but we're wired to be attracted to what we think is beautiful is actually the colors, I think, of the natural world, fruits and vegetables. And we also have a little bit of sense of what's poisonous.
Yeah.
You see that in snakes and mushrooms. Other living beings get a warning. Be careful, that's a big wasp that could kill you, and we do too if we pay attention to it. But if we didn't have the desire, we wouldn't go towards the tomatoes.
Okay, good. So this is great because there's something about desire as you're describing like this, the way the supermarkets are arranged. Desire, like seeing the bright colors of the first things you see, the fruits, the Oreos, whatever that stands out to you, the way that things, as you're discussing, I'm thinking about the way everything is marketed and packaged and presented and sold to us through a wrapper and an advertisement and what the difference is between the cool, slick appearance and what good marketing versus good content. Those are two entirely different things. And you may want so badly to because of the wrapper, because of the cool jingle, you want so badly to have that cool thing, but actually then you taste it and it's not good for you, right? But I also, like Leah says, we're hardwired in this way. And the way that you describe it, Leah, like we don't ever just want what's good for us. We want more. And that there's something about desire that speaks to the human condition of longing just for longing's sake, for more. You can't help it. And when we're dazzled by something, and again, I'm wondering whether God thought we could control that, but we can't, because what God thought is that we could just see something and, well, that is desirable. But when Eve sees it, it's not just a desire, it's a temptation. It's something new. And again, I think part of what's so astounding about this temptation is that yes, of course, it's for fruit and it's for a thing that God said no to, but it's also for the fruit of knowledge. Knowledge. Eve wants to know something. Laskil, to perceive, to understand. It's not just, oh, I want it to be mine. That's to leave it in that realm is too moralistic. Just don't you want what's not yours. You be satisfied with what you have. That's a part of it. But it's, why do we want it? We want to know it. It's too tempting to say, this is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. You can't have any. What? No way. I want to know that. Anybody who runs around with little kids knows. It's just like, if you tell them they're curious by nature, they can't know something, they get a hint that you're talking about something, they just want to know more. That is the nature of the human being. It's a fundamental orientation towards a kind of longing that somebody used this word earlier, that is tethered to curiosity. Okay, and so knowledge is a part of this. And by the way, take a look at what happens when they eat the fruit. Then the eyes of both of them were open and they knew that they were naked. They had been naked before, but now their eyes open and they see that they're naked. So they got knowledge. It worked. They know things they didn't know. And of course, their nudity is also and can be an object, thought of as an object of desire. And there's, of course, desire we also speak of in the sexual realm. And we don't have time in this class to really play out all the implications there, but it's also about the desire, the way that we desire one another, and that the way that desire can be cunning. So with that in mind, so we don't have time to do much more today, but in some ways we still have to do the most major thing of all, which is to see that this is the Garden of Eden story. This is like early symbolism, the use of desire. I don't think we've fully even unpacked what's happening here between God's vision and the way it plays out. But there's one more thing we need to see, which is the way that desire plays out for the rest of the Torah. And there's, I love doing this, right? Like it's almost becomes like I don't mean to be shticky, but the Torah really is just remarkable in this way. There's only one other context in the Torah where desire is spoken of or used. Only one. Anyone?
Thou shalt not covet.
There you go, Yonatan. I saw you coming out of the corner of my eye, Yonatan. That's exactly right. Okay, so let's take a look. It's a very prominent place, and yet it's the only other place which is in the listing of the 10 Commandments. It's the 10th commandment. And we don't think of it because we translated it, as Yonatan just did, as covet. But this word, which appears so prominently in Genesis, doesn't appear again until the 10 Commandments are given in Exodus. And just to give you a sense of, it's a pretty prominent, wordy commandment. Because just to give it like a running start here, let's take a look at the last 5. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. All of those are pretty like rapid fire, right? That's all you get. You shall not murder. You don't need any explanation for that. Just don't murder. You don't need any explanation for don't commit adultery. But the 10th commandment is more spoken out. And there is that root again. Nechmad, here it's tachmod. Lo tachmod beit re'echa. You shall not covet. Now let's remember that this is really, it's you shall not desire your neighbor's house. You shall not covet / desire your neighbor's wife or his male or female servant or his ox or his donkey or anything that is your neighbor's. Okay. All right. Now, there's like, that's a powerful connection. Something that only appears in the Garden of Eden and then again in the 10 Commandments. Now, what is the context of desire here? You shall not desire, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, wife, servants, animals. We've been talking a lot about desire. Does this fit neatly into that? Is it different now? This is one of the 10 Commandments. What's the role of desire here? I want to let Yonatan pick up since you identified it. If this is a place you want to jump in.
Well, it's a bit of an old hand, but I'll see if I can make any connection. What's amazing to me about the Genesis story is that the thing that is desired and the thing that is taken are actually two different things. And this connects back to your comment earlier about the fruit trees bearing fruit, right? That God's vision for trees is that trees are made of fruit, and that isn't how trees actually grow into the world, except that it seems like this one may be, because it says this tree is good for eating, not that its fruit is good for eating. And Eve says, or Eve thinks, oh, this tree is good for eating. This tree is very tempting, but she doesn't eat the tree. She eats the fruit. And maybe that dissonance, now if I'm going to connect it to the Exodus verses, we think we want something and we think we're taking something, and it turns out actually that our expectations and reality are very different from one another.
Yeah. Just reminding us of some of that opening thinking about the ideal and the real, God's vision and the way it plays out on earth. And I do think that with that sort of framework in mind, some of what we're dealing with here is, I think the Torah's narrative wants to suggest that our desire is destructive and can be dangerous and can be harmful, but it's kind of like, it's only natural. It's not our fault. It's the way that it has to play out here in our realm. And that God, to a certain extent, did not anticipate that or understand that. right? I mean, I don't think when we say things like this, analyzing the narrative of Gan Eden, that we're really like making strong theological statements. What does it mean? God doesn't understand something. Different ways of speaking about God, okay? But in this story, part of what we're meant to see is that God's ideal, the way things ought to be, is that I could look at my neighbor's house or partner or car or job and say, wow, amazing. My neighbor has such a beautiful house. Good for you. Good for you. Wow. I'm so happy. I can see how desirable that car is. What a great thing that you get to drive a Jaguar. But I don't. The way I'm built is like, whoa, what's it like to drive a Jaguar? I want to drive a Jaguar. I want to feel that smooth ride, right? And your house and your wife and I want your life. I can't just look at it and just appreciate it as an object of desire. For me, from my human eye, it's immediately a temptation, and I want it for me. And that's what's dangerous. But again, God plants that in us, and then somehow, either intentionally or not, it doesn't play out the way the way that it is suggested to play out. By the way, just have to do this, but it appears in the Ten Commandments. In case anyone thinks I'm stretching here, it's remarkable that it appears in the Ten Commandments. This is the only other usage of tachmod. And then it appears, just so you know, the Ten Commandments are repeated in the book of Deuteronomy, and this time the language is even more directly connected. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. There's that tachmod. And then we didn't see this in the Exodus version. You shall not be tempted by your neighbor's house. V'lo titaveh beit re'echa, sadehu v'avdo v'amato. So there, that language of tempted. Whose language is that? That's Adam and Eve's language, right? So by that point, and this is Moses retelling the commandments, you can imagine Moses saying like, yeah, if you didn't get the thou shalt not covet thing, think about the Garden of Eden. It goes all the way back. It's who we, as Leah said, it's who we are. It's hardwired, all right? So now you have all the pieces. And I want to know what you make of that. What do you make of the fact that our 10th commandment, right? It's like, what does it even mean? Don't want something. But we are commanded not to desire, or at least not to desire that which is not ours. So what do you think of that commandment? You know, like now that we see it as a kind of an echo of Eden, what do we do with it? Hyro.
When you want somebody else's properties or persons, what have you, that creates a turmoil inside of you. So it's good not to want to have what somebody else has.
Yeah. In other words, this is, and we've been using this language throughout, that desire can lead you to want something which is not good for you, which is not healthy for you, which is not, right? And that's part of the problem. And in some ways, we don't have to get moralistic. We just talk about what is a good, healthy yearning and what is a bad. Do we think that it is wrong to be sexually attracted to someone? Of course not. That's not this religion. But it can get really problematic when you're sexually attracted to someone that is married and in a monogamous relationship, right? Or if you're married in a monogamous relationship, like, that's dangerous. So we're talking about safeguarding of doing things in a way, and that's part of what we're contending with here. And yet, it's not the dilemma, the great dilemma, and it's one of the mysteries of creation, shall we say, is why do we want things that aren't good for us? It's like mind-blowing. Why do you want candy? You don't want vegetables. It's just like, that's every kid in the world knows that to be a deep truth. But why? Why not just want the things that are good for you? Want the people that are good for you? Want the lifestyle that's good for you? Why do we want things that are bad for us? That's, in some ways, the big unanswerable question at the heart of all of this. Okay. Mark Strunin, and maybe we'll have time for two. We'll see. But Mark.
I think this is a Yetzer HaTov, Yetzer Hara moment, because why do we want things that are not good for us? because it gives us an opportunity to exercise choice. And in that choice, we're behaving in a godlike or divine-like nature. And I think it also goes to the heart of how do you distinguish between the practical aspects of fulfilling a mitzvah, the doing, as compared to what you feel about it, which is the kavanah. Sometimes I don't feel like doing the mitzvah, but then I do the mitzvah. So have I fulfilled the mitzvah? That's the questions it raises for me. So
Great.
it's all about choice.
I thank you that. I love some, especially some of that opening language about you know, wanting things which, like, how do I want things that are good for me? How do I want things that why do I want things that are bad for me? And I think that there's some great dilemma here that we can't quite escape, which is that the things which God puts into the world have let me put it this way: before they ate the fruit, they had desire for one another, it seems, right? They're like naked together, and it was natural. It was, so one way of looking at this is that they followed their instincts and they only desired what was best for them, right? The animal instinct will lead us to the right food, the right partner, that there's a pre-knowledge state of being that is just to want what the body needs. But it is, as Mark puts it, a kind of, remember, they're going to become like divine beings when they're able to make choices about desiring this or that. Not just desiring what's best for me, but desiring something that's just wondrous for different reason. And to desire is divine to a certain extent. That kind of appreciation for beauty, for something like, which I don't necessarily need, but I just want to know more about. I just want to hold for a while. I just want to, and maybe it isn't even mine, it doesn't even belong to me, but something now have this advanced consciousness, this divine consciousness that leads me to want more than just what I need. And that presents us with a dilemma that we need a 10th commandment to continue to deal with, that we're never going to be able to fully shake because it's embedded in creation, because it's a part of who we are. So with that, I'm glad to be back on this journey with you all, and I wish us all a year of desiring only that which is good for us. And I hope to see you all next week, same time.
Thank you.
And check out the podcast. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.